I was listening to Kevin talk about the importance of and the kind of the next step for the future of your organization here in Oklahoma. And as a director of a sister organization in Washington, I can't tell you, as small business owners, how important it is to have your own group representing you and to have a voice for you, whether it's in the legislature, whether it's with the DEQ, whether it's in how training happens, leveling the playing field, any of those things. You can't do it by yourself. You can't do it in groups of 2 or 3. Only in the strength of a state organization are you going to be able to accomplish that. And he said he was broke, or the organization is broke. Well, it's because you're starting out, starting over, and starting new. But how many guys are installers? So here's the challenge. I've got an on-site system that I want you to install. It's going to take a tank, an ATU, a pump tank, and a drain field. And I want you to start tomorrow. I need you to get it done in 3 days. Here's a number 2 shovel. And that's all the equipment that you have to do it. Are you going to pick up that challenge? No, you can't, right? So I want you to think about that in terms of how an association works, in terms of its representation of you all as an industry. You can't give them a number 2 shovel. You have to join, you have to participate. In its infancy here now, starting over, you're a volunteer organization, and that means that you gotta show up. And as it starts to move forward, as you gain strength, as you gain momentum, then other good things are going to start to develop out of that. And so with that, I'll leave you with that. I just want to encourage you that I have traveled all over the country, and I have seen state organizations representing the industry from every level that looks like ours in Texas, with dedicated staff and programs that are in place, to new state associations that are just starting to figure out what they want to do next. And that's where you guys are. You have your whole future as an association ahead of you, how you want to focus, what you want to do, and what you want to accomplish. So talk to your leadership and support them as you're going forward. I know I was preaching, because Kevin didn't want to, right? All right, so we're going to talk about pathogen exposures in wastewater. This was a program that was developed under a grant from the Safety Health Investment Program in Washington. And basically what we did was we went out into the field and trammed around with pump truck companies that were servicing septic systems of all kinds and stripes. And what we were looking at was to get a better understanding of what our pathogen exposures were to our workers. And one of the things that we did in our initial research was we took a look at what other studies had been done, and really what we found was that there hadn't been any other studies that could correlate to a pump truck operator or an installer working on basically on a failed system, doing a repair with that direct exposure to essentially untreated raw human waste and all of the pathogens that are there. And so we came up with this plan to do this field observation and workplace sampling that were conducted in the next phase. And so we wanted to quantify these exposures, identify how industry was mitigating that risk, whether in a selection of personal protective equipment, and then just come up with some simple tools that wouldn't cost a lot of money, weren't hard to implement in a company, that would mitigate some of those exposures for us. So we did some field sampling in a variety of workplace settings, and so we have guys that have secondary storage at their site, so they'll have their trucks running around, they'll bring it to the office central location, and then they're running tanker trucks at night to go off to the dump sites to do that, so they can keep their trucks rolling throughout the day. Some companies organize their trips so that they, when the truck is full, they go to a dump site, turn it around, and then just keep on going. But we did sampling on offices, shops, companies that were doing pumping, jetting system repairs. We took samples on wastewater tanks, sewer lines that were being cleared, and various drain field components. And essentially what we did was we did contact surface testing with swabs, and then aerosol and vapor testing, and then we took fluid samples out of septic tanks. We controlled them with the forms that we filled out so that we had a line of possession, just like evidence would be done as it went through the system. We used trip blanks and stuff, so we would send in a sample, we'd send in another sample that was that didn't have anything in it, but like a Petri dish that hadn't been exposed and a Petri dish that had been exposed, because we wanted to ensure that the testing protocols that were used weren't compromised in the labs that we were sending them to. And so these are just, is just an example of just the different areas that we did this for fluid testing, the contact surface testing. We wanted to try and understand clean to dirty working techniques. And so working in the back of the truck where it's dirty, and how does that migrate up into the cab of the truck, and now you're eating lunch? How does that migrate up into the cab of the truck and you're filling out paperwork, and then you go back to the office and you hand it to a secretary? How does that vector pathway of pathogen exposure happen? In this lower right-hand picture, company policy was employees aren't supposed to have their cell phones on them when they're actually doing work. This guy was a little bit of a cowboy and would wear his phone. He's doing jetting here, and as he was jetting out this sewer line, his hose was just going back and forth across his phone. And so I went up and took a swab on that, sent it in, came back dirty as hell. And so just simple things like that, but you think about what happens next, right? So now, what happens next in that picture? He gets done with the job. What's he going to do with that phone? He's going to call the office, right? And so now you've got hand-to-face contact, right? And what are we careful about with our kids? Got colds and stuff. It's hand-to-face contact. That's how they get their colds and stuff. So aerosol testing, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but we checked pump trucks while they're in operation, and this is a guy that's cleaning out a D box, and you can see we set the Petri dishes out here. So he's just got a pressure nozzle on a hose and he's spraying it, but you'll see in some the case studies that we do here that you can see he's right over this open little pit that he's got there with this high pressure water hose, and the aerosolization that's going on there in this D box is pretty nasty. And so and the results that came back from the Petri dishes was substantiated this. This is another picture of one of the dump sites where one of our guys was dumping. We set the Petri dishes out here again just to find the aerosolization or capture the aerosolization of this wastewater just as we're handling it in the ways that we do. And of all the things that we saw, I mean, this was probably one of the most surprising elements of the field study that we did, is understanding just how much aerosolization of this raw sewage occurs with these pathogens that are in it that are there. So testing controls, we had trip blanks, field blanks, we did duplicates, we did split samples, and in just a variety of the different settings, just again to verify what the results were going to be. And of course, what we found was that almost everything is contaminated. And we know that nobody's surprised about this, and up until now, we know that it's dirty, but today I want to just share some of what we found to talk to you about how it's really unhealthy. So from our list, you saw, if you were in the talk this morning, you saw this was what we came up with in terms of the different pathogen organisms that are in there. And I'll just touch on a couple of them. Here's strep, staph, this E. coli, 0157H7. E. coli we found in all of the samples, but then the 157H7 is what actually is one of them anyway that actually makes you sick. And when we started testing for this specifically, it turned up in every single sample that we pulled. I talked about MRSA a little bit this morning. That's a staph infection on steroids. Anybody have any experience with MRSA or a family member or anything? So MRSA is broken out into the community generally as a pathogen. And the thing that is a little bit scary about it is that they've gotten down now to just 2 or 3 antibiotics that will deal with it effectively. And it's a kind of a hard course to get rid of. And the molds and rare molds, again, as I mentioned this morning, were aerosolized out of a sewer line that was being jetted, and the guy was, of course, right over the hole, assumed the position with your equipment, and was just breathing this aerosolized molds and spores and stuff right straight into his lungs. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that works, what the work practices is, vector pathways, and how some of this stuff can potentially make you sick. But where do we start? So when you look, we talked this morning about general management principles of safety, the KISS, keep it simple. But I wanted to talk a little bit about safety management versus safety programs, and characterize accidents and illnesses, and then take a look at some of these management tools that you have. So what are the best things that you can do to protect yourself? What are the things that we do that have the greatest exposures? And what are proactive steps for that? And so when you look at managing safety, at the owner level, it has to do with developing a safe company culture. And I talked about walking the talk a little bit this morning, because when guys are out in the field working on their own and they get faced with something that's not normal, they are going to ask the question, what would the boss do? And so that's that part of the safety culture in your organization that you own as a business owner. Working safely, though, takes it really down to situational awareness and those personal decisions that you make. And so if you have, what we see it in the field is your personal protective equipment becomes compromised. We see a lot of these vinyl gloves that you get from Home Depot and stuff that people use to kind of keep themselves a little bit clean, but they really don't give you any barrier protection because they're not designed to do that for pathogen exposures. And so your decisions in practice are what makes a difference. And so here's just the slide has just got an example of another of these stories that came to us as we were doing these presentations. And one in particular, this MRSA infection in the nose, and actually was in the sinus cavity from aerosols working on an on-site system. It was a pumper. They opened up the lid, and we teach in some of these troubleshooting and O&M programs about using all your senses, right? And so when you open up the lid, you're looking for that visual, coffee ground colored layer on top, and it's kind of a warm but not offensive smell that comes off of it. But geez, we figured out that now this stuff is aerosolized. The sampling that we took, we'd open up a lid, and before anything was done, no stirring, no mixing, no anything, we took a Petri dish and just held it over the opening of the septic tank, and just that warm, moist air coming up out of the septic tank contaminated the Petri dishes with pathogens just at that point. And this is what happened to this guy, is that he was working on a tank. That night he ended up in the hospital with a MRSA infection, and his sinuses was there for almost a week over that. So cases of E. coli, hepatitis, we'll talk about belt and suspender approaches to that, and then employees with less than 6 months on the job. And one of the things that's pretty common in our industry that I hear is that, well, I've been doing this for 25 years and I haven't died yet, and those kinds of comments that really talk about some of the pathogens that are here, but some of the things in raw human waste that can make you sick also include worms and things and viruses. There's over 100 viruses in wastewater. And how many viruses do you need when you look at vector pathways and exposure of any particular pathogen? How many viruses does it take to make you sick? One, right? How many worms does it take to make you sick? One. And so that's kind of the threshold of where you want to start building your safety program around for protecting against pathogens. And if you cover those two things, everything else really falls below that. You're going to cover that in terms of your barrier protection or some of the other things that you're doing. So residential systems, as an industry, we work in all of these areas. I put this slide in here just to point out the guy does have his safety glasses with him, right? But there it is. So what are we working in? In Washington, public beaches are closed when E. coli levels hit 126 colony-forming units per milliliter. Raw sewage in our field samples were commonly 160,000. And this is where I mentioned earlier that it's the duration or the concentration and the frequency of exposure that is so different for people in our industry than just the general population. And that's why the risk is really elevated for the potential to become sick. So how does that happen? Just generally being unaware of what the exposures are, positive reinforcement for negative behaviors. With pathogens and illnesses, it's not something that hits you right away. This takes a few days for colds and this stuff to develop. And then also then being in what I call a line of fire. And that's the sewage exposed by backsplash. But a less obvious line of fire is this aerosolization. And what we were able to determine was that workers, when these pump trucks are running and stuff, are actually operating in a bubble. So our greatest risk of transmission for these folks that are in our industry is a close contact. They're not trained to use the protective equipment that they have, and they don't consistently use it. One of the things we left as a recommendation coming out of this is if you're going to use a mask to minimize aerosols, don't get just a dust mask from again, Lowe's or the Home Depot or wherever. You want to think about when you go to the doctor's office and you're sick, what does the nurse wear when she's taking your temperature and that kind of stuff? And essentially what it is it's an N95 rated mask, and that will provide a level of protection from airborne pathogens that is adequate. So when we look at PPE, what do you need? Is it available? Is it user-friendly? And is it fit for use? And when needed, will I use it 100% of the time? And as we observed guys working in the field, almost all of these were broken at some point, and what it ended up with was compromised exposure to the pathogens in the work that they were doing. So we're looking at barrier protection, working clean to dirty techniques, and then what the cleanup steps are afterwards, and then kind of laying that over on top of what the work activity is. And so are they different from what you're exposed to with some kids? And you don't know from one household to the next what the pathogens are, because you don't know what the health conditions are of the family that's in there, right? And so all of that is going to be accumulated into the waste stream. And you heard Sarah talking about that primary treatment that happens in the septic tank is limited to the biosolids principally and stuff, and it's not until you get further down in the waste stream treatment part of the system that ultimately ending up in the soil component that these pathogens get adequately addressed. Ow. So this attitude that we have, that it won't happen to me, this positive reinforcement for negative behavior, you just don't know what that looks like. And this is Tampa Bay. These guys both got infections with MRSA, got pulled out of play over it, and ultimately what they figured out was that there was a MRSA exposure in the locker room, and it got transmitted from wet towels to benches to wet towels to the players. MRSA can hit you at a couple of different places. It can be a skin infection. You can get MRSA of the eye. You can get MRSA of the lungs. So it can go internal, MRSA of the sinus cavities, and it's really difficult to treat. So this is a job that we showed up on, and you can see the guy. This is a install repair that he was doing, and he's jetting the line that goes from underneath this corner of the trailer out to the drain field in the front. And so they had dug this area up. You can see all the mud and dirt on this side. They had pumped the septic tank the day before, and we showed up, and so they had advised the homeowner, reduce your water usage. We're going to be working on this for a day and a half or so. You've got 3,000 or 1,000 gallons of capacity in your tank bag, and gather up a bunch of clean snow or relatively clean snow, and then bring it back. And then we boil it. We use double filters and everything else just to minimize our exposure to getting sick before our climb. So there are some behavioral elements that fall into this as well. Behaviors are learned. You've got this perception of risk. You heard that a little bit in Keith's video this morning, that you're either a risk taker or you're not. Acceptance of the risk, past experience, and then the current need to get the job done all ends up with it working out, or sometimes not so much. And what happened on this was that they were pumping out a digester, and the hose was over the edge and developed a wear in it, and so it started to leak. And so he shut off the pump, went over and dropped the dog ears on the hose, but didn't depressurize the system or the hose. And so when it came off, and then of course he got splattered with all of this. So talk a little bit about the microbiology of sewage. Source from the CDC. Over half of all Americans will be infected with an intestinal parasite at some point in their lives. And so this is the point of, when you come up onto a job site, you don't know what the health of the family is or what's going on in there. And so you have to manage your exposure with your personal protective equipment from that live down. And so, there's bacteria, there's aerobic, anaerobic, and facultative. Some are pathogenic organisms. They're used as indicator organisms. That's how they tell when they're going to close beaches and some of that kind of stuff from the health department standpoint. Viruses, most importantly, there's more than 100 types of viruses that are found in sewage. And then you look at the vector pathways and then what the infection rate of what they are. Here's just a picture of all that. Protozoans, a little bit bigger organisms. When they're all contained in the tank, all these guys are working the system off of each other, and everybody's happy. But when you get exposed to them, then that's when some potential problems can emerge. Worms, other larger organisms that are in sewage. Again, just need one. However it gets to you to get sick. So this is an interesting, these next two slides are interesting because the first one gives you this organism survival time in soil. So these are things that can make you sick. And so you think of why the rules around surfacing effluent and the health issues are here is because of the survival times of these things can be in some cases pretty long, right? And so they become vector pathways, and ultimately, you get animals in the yard. You think about how you have to protect lagoons here in the state from animals, right, getting into them, and they become vector pathways. And then another number of organisms it takes to just cause illness. And ultimately, this is what you're protecting for, and you're looking at the fit for use issue around the personal protective choices that you're making. So from Washington, Department of Health, infections and so once it gets above a certain number, they quit putting a number there. It's just many, and this is how they describe infections by worms, viruses, and some of these other things. MRSA now is recognized as having broken out into the community out of the healthcare facilities that it was mostly usually restricted to. So what are the things that you can do to protect yourself? Personal protective equipment means that it's specialized, it's fit for use, it's designed to do something relative to a task that you're doing. It can be barrier protection, it can be clothing, it can be splashback, so it's glasses, and ultimately you want to look at whether or not it's doing what it's designed to do, and you've heard me say this a couple times, is it fit for use? So this is a typical, the gloves here, these are those rubber dipped cloth back gloves that are pretty common in our industry, and many of our guys wear them, and they after these gloves, he's been running with these in his truck for probably a month or two, but after a few uses, the outside of them become contaminated, and so they provide no barrier protection really at all. Wearing nitro gloves inside of these, a lot of guys do that, and that gives them a little bit more protection as they go forward. One of the challenges with these nitro gloves, though, you put them on, and even if you buy these that are medical grade gloves, if they're only 3 or 4 mil, like you usually see in the hospital. They don't have the durability to survive the things that we do in opening up lids and handling the screws and so on and so forth with the tanks. So a lot of the guys, double glove with these big rubber gloves. It doesn't take too long before the insides of these are fairly contaminated. So, having a double glove system of some sort is a good idea. So the gloves that you buy, kind of the way I tell this story is that every day in China, they make 1 million nitrile gloves. And then they take them out and they test them. And the ones that pass the test become medical grade gloves. The ones that don't pass the test become mechanics gloves, and they send them over here and they get distributed into the stores. And most everybody that I've talked to goes and gets basically these mechanic type style of gloves to keep them clean, but it doesn't give them any protection from the pathogens. What makes it even doubly hard is that this is a box that I took off of one of the pump trucks, and it's got all kinds of language on here, right? And that says it's extreme, it's in nitrile industrial gloves, but then it's got this little caution box down here that says these gloves are not intended for are intended for industrial use only. They may not be worn for barrier protection in medical or healthcare applications. How does that help you guys? Right? Those aren't words that you might relate to if you ever got as far as looking at the caution statement here. But now understanding that your exposure is the same, essentially, working in raw, untreated human waste as the medical profession is, somewhere on that box when you get these is that you want to have it say that they are medical grade gloves. Examination grade gloves, that's another word that would be on it. And then to get past the durability issue, depending on what you do, 4 to 6 mil would be a minimum, but based on whatever your experience is, if the fingertips are still coming off or if they're splitting, the simple solution is just to get a higher mil glove, maybe a 7 or 8 mil glove. Some guys I ran with, they would put on 3 or 4 pairs of these gloves, and then before they got into the truck, they take off the outer layer, and now they got a pair of clean gloves, and back into the truck they go and they drive down the road, start the next job. That works for some people. If you've worn these too much, your hands tend to, at least for me anyway, tend to sweat on the inside. So that's really not an option for me. I'll just take them and do them one at a time. So suspended aerosols and splashback, the eyeglasses or contact lenses are not considered adequate. And you take a look at what a lot of us run with, like your glasses even right here, right? And so a lot of guys have some version of this. This is pretty good, but you can improve this. You can get safety glasses that are like this that give you some protection here, but also have a lining on the inside that put a little seal around your eye socket for protection against the aerosolization and potentially some of the exposures. And I've looked them up online, and you can buy boxes of those things for $4 a piece. So they're not expensive really at all. So here's one of our guys that's actually doing a pretty good job. He's wearing his double gloves. He's fixing it at a dump site. He's got a coverall on the outside to protect his clothes. And the way he operated was he had a 5-gallon pail that was, where his hoses sit, and he would take off all this stuff and stick it in a 5-gallon pail. Then he had clean clothes on when he was getting into the truck. He was really conscientious about that. We'll come back to him in a minute. The N95 mask provides the best protection from this, and you can actually get these are N100, and they'll give you 100% protection against those exposures. You can get them either vented or unvented. They really don't restrict your airflow for breathing at all, and they're pretty inexpensive. So hepatitis A, this is just another one of those things that's in all of the categories of the potential exposures. You can get shots for all this. If you're handling or exposed to raw human waste, you want to consider whether or not you are up to date on your various shots. Hepatitis B as well, tetanus. Puncture wounds, animal bites, burns, abrasions, and surgery. I was with a guy that we had a tank that had backed up, and we opened it up, and he got into the inspection port, and there was this big white glob of grease right there, right? And that was what was causing the problem. So he reached his hand in with nothing on, no glove at all, and grabbed this big wad of grease out of the front end of this pipe on the inlet baffle, and he had laid out a nice piece of plastic so he didn't get the lawn of the homeowner dirty. But as he pulled his hand out, it was a concrete tank, and that rough concrete scraped him from here down past off his fingers. And now he's got these scrapes, and he's openly bleeding. What do you think he did next? There was just a little bit more of that grease inside that inlet baffle, and so back in he went with that open exposed wound. And this is how this kind of stuff happens. And so that was a personal decision that he made with not really thinking through or understanding what his exposure was. Element here, as we were watching, kind of assumed the position. This gentleman was scratching his nose, right? And I mean, it caught my attention, so I started counting. And so typical pump out on tank takes maybe 45 minutes or so. How many times do you think your hand-to-face contact is in 45 minutes? We asked him after he got done. He said, I don't know. I don't even notice that I do it. He's maybe 3 times, 18 times in 45 minutes, right? And so that's a vector pathway for this exposure, even if you have all of your other PPE in place as well. And part of what was happening for him is this warm, moist air that was being aerosolized up out of here. He's got whiskers, right? And if those get wet or you get over steam or something like that, they itch. And so it's a pretty natural, unconscious thing that you do to do that. So being aware of it, avoid touching your face, mouth, or eyes. There's these vector pathways. And then also we've added smoking or chew to the system. So here's kind of well, it's a companion. We saw it earlier, but and so here it was 90-degree plus day. We were fishing around to find the end of a lateral, and it ended up being on the other side of this fence. But this guy worked himself up into a pretty good sweat, and so it was hand to forehead contact, and he was just wiping the sweat off, and that was his vector pathway. We've talked about him. This guy was taking a smoke break. And what was kind of funny about this was that he had some sense of awareness that his hands were dirty and everything else. So when he lit up the cigarette, he would hold it like this. And that's how he was puffing on it, right? Because he thought somehow maybe that would help. Pretty good practice here. We've got, boots, coveralls, double gloved. Maybe one exposure here is this pressure nozzle going into the tank is going to be creating some aerosol. Might be limited with the vacuum hose on this. Here's our guy again at the pump site. And but what happened was all day long we ran with him, and he was just, I'll say, religious about keeping himself clean and taking his equipment on and off this way. But at the end of the day, he had one more load to go dump, and when he got in line, there were like 3 or 4 trucks ahead of him, and the guy running the dump site was yelling at everybody, hurry up, faster, get moving, I want to get out of here, it's the end of the day, I'm late. And so sitting back in his truck watching this, he didn't want to take the abuse. And so he made the conscious decision to just jump out of his truck. He put his gloves on and stuff, but he went ahead and just dumped the truck. And so what happened was we set out a Petri dish over here, and I think it comes up in another slide or two, but it caught kind of the usual suspects, but it also picked up an STD, chlamydia, in our sample. So now something that we think we can't catch off a toilet seat has been aerosolized and vectored 25 feet or 20 feet away into a Petri dish in this work environment that he's got right here. And so, again, another one of these unrecognized potential exposures. You saw this picture earlier this morning, and just no PPE, creating aerosols. All these trucks are dumping around here. The one thing that I know about this guy is that he's not married. Why do I know he's not married? because I know my wife would not let me go out with socks like that. All right. So it's a compliance barrier. Some of the things that contribute to that are cost, peer pressure. In some organizations I've seen this, time commitments or time restraints on it, and this nothing really bad has happened to me before, and so this positive reinforcement for negative behavior. One of the things that we saw on a warm day, this is how our guys typically rinse out the tank as they're pumping it. But this next slide, and so what we observed was this aerosolization that was going on, and the potential for splashback here as well. And they're back charging the tank to break up the layer up on top. And this is what it looks like on a low humidity day. The aerosolization is still occurring, but then we were on another project and it was damp, high humidity, and this is actually what's going on in this picture. You just can't see it very well. And so the exposures of the aerosolization of this stuff are pretty high. So that may not be a good practice to do in general of back pumping into the tank to break up that layer. Jetter job, you can see we had the Petri dishes out here. We had them stop the hose 8 feet in and then go turn off the equipment, and then we closed up our samples and sent them in, just again to understand how much aerosolization is going on. These came back contaminated. We followed on with him during the day and ended up at a bank job doing a sewer line. And so this isn't a confined space, but it's an enclosed space. And so he's running the jetter down there, basically right over the hole that you can see right here. And now he's concentrating this aerosolization that he's doing during this jetting procedure because of just where he's working. And this was the results of what came out of it. And so just a variety of things that ultimately can make you sick. This is also where the rare molds came out of as well. Another surprise that we found as we started looking at the truck operation itself was we started taking samples around, starting right up next to the truck, and this is what the results were at the truck vent. And at 60 feet, it wasn't until we got out to 60 feet that we got no growth in 4 days. And so this is just basically what it looks like. So at 10 feet, the bacterial growth or pathogen exposure was similar to growth at the truck venting. At 30 feet, half the growth at truck venting. At 60 feet, little or no colony growth in 4 days. So you think about when you're operating a pump truck and it's in its normal operation mode, you're creating this big bubble, right? Not only around you, but also in the neighborhood potentially that you're working in. We looked at that and we thought, okay, so ATUs that are running air, 24/7. We did a sample of venting on the ATU vents that had either lost or didn't have any charcoal or any restriction on them, and basically we got the same results there. And so now this becomes a different issue in terms of public health that could very well be looked at. So this is back to our guy who didn't put on his PPE. You can see the Petri dishes that we had right there. And this was what the results were, and it's this gram-positive Coccobacillus. This family of pathogens include the STDs that were captured there. So we looked at then practices of how these companies are dumping, and so at the King County dump site, this is set up so like a half a dozen trucks can come in at a time. They've got an open hole here that goes down a tankage below. Some guys come in and they do this, pretty good setup. They got a short hose that they use to dump the truck. Other companies just kind of MacGyvered some spare pipe that they had around, and it unloads it, and it gets it pretty close to the hole. But you've got this whole last 8 inches of open liquid that's dropping, that's just creating this aerosol around their pumping off procedures. So the usual suspects. This is a septic tank job. The sewer, it had one line that was plugged, and they started out opening up the D box, and they were going to try and clear it by running water from the D box down instead, and plan B was to go to the other end and dig up the end of the pipe and dig it up. And so, so we took a background sample, verified that there was nothing in the air, nothing weird going on. And then while he was working, we put it up and got these results on it. And gram negatives, rods are staph types of bacteria. And he's, kind of what I said, in the line of fire of this work activity that he's doing. Then his partner's down on the other end, and these next couple of slides, just watch the sequencing of this. So here he's digging up the end of the lateral, no gloves, and the shovel. Things start getting a little messier, and so he puts his gloves on, but at some point then his shovel now is tipped over into the sewage here. And where do you think that shovel's going next? Back on the truck, right, for the next job, which is where he'll be pulling it off with no gloves. And so now you got that, now vector pathways, face to hand, and that kind of stuff. So it's just how things are going on out there in the field. Some protection for the public. I know in every class that I've taught or ever been through or seen in other places, we always tell the guys, don't use the homeowner's water hose for cleaning the tank and all that kind of stuff. And everybody uses the homeowner's water hose to do that work. And so, so there's a couple of tells in here that, this was an elderly couple, but they had this kind of stuff in their yard. So what do you think's going on there? Yeah, it's grandkids, right? So, so protection of the public and the customers that you serve is kind of the point that I'm coming to here. This is the bank job again, and basically I took this shot to show that, I mean, there wasn't any. They could have set up a couple of cones or something just to kind of redirect the traffic that was going on. It had been a simple thing to do, and but they didn't do that. So this gentleman is a pumper tech, and we had traveled with him throughout the summer. And every time we met with him, like the next time, he said, so what were the results of my tests that you guys took, right? And we'd give them to him. And as we went forward, every time we saw him, he had more stuff on, right? So it was kind of fun to see at least one of the guys getting the message and being persistent about wearing it. So as we kind of wrap this up, there's a couple of things that we see that are on pump trucks, but any time that you're going to be working in and or around these pathogens is having some kind of disinfectant, and the most important thing that it needs to say on there is that it's flammable, right? Because that means that it's at least 68 or 70% alcohol by volume. And that's how you buy this stuff. The cheap stuff has just got less alcohol in it. The more expensive stuff has more. The other thing that I would add to this, in particular to the splashback potentials and getting stuff in your eyes and all that, I would encourage you to carry at least a gallon of sterile water on your truck in a jug, so that if something like a hose comes off or something happens that you get splashed in the face, you've got some fresh water that you can at least start to rinse out your eyes and that stuff on. So, basic hygiene practices are up here. Hands with soap and water if you've got it. Avoid this hand-to-face contact. Of course, wash up before you eat. Because I know our guys always stop for lunch at Denny's or somewhere with their pump truck in the parking lot, right? We just grab a sandwich and are on to the next job. So medical grade gloves to prevent cuts and contact, rubber boots if you have them, and you can clean contaminated work clothing with a 0.05% chlorine. That's 1 part household bleach to 100 parts of water. So you think about the wash cycle of your contaminated clothing and stuff. You should be putting a little bit of bleach in there. It doesn't take a lot. Guys would put all that stuff in the laundry and they'd take the bleach jug and they'd go glug, 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 and that would be good. You don't need to use anywhere near that amount. So 1 part per 100 parts of water. All right? So in the picture here is this guy is wearing his food handler's glove right there. These are the same guys that make your Subway sandwiches, right? And stuff. And so he's got this idea that he's protecting himself somehow, but he's really not. And so don't be this guy.